Hello and welcome to my channel, In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and today I have another tag for you. This is the Epistolary Query Tag. So my co-hosts and I are celebrating Epistolary January this month, reading all things epistolary. And we put our heads together and came up with this tag with questions about epistolary novels and reading. And this tag is for anyone, whether or not you love epistolary novels. So feel free to do this tag. Consider yourself tagged. I will tag a few specific people at the end, but if you want to do this tag, go right ahead. And so without further ado, let's head on to the prompts and the questions and my answers of them. First of all, on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you feel about epistolary novels in general? 1, you hate them. 5, you love them. And I know many people have strong feelings about epistolary novels one way or the other. So I'm really curious to hear everybody's answers to these questions. Obviously, those of us who are hosting this readathon, generally speaking, we love epistolary novels or we wouldn't be reading them. I say I would land probably on a 4 because I do love epistolary novels, but I can see the flaws of the format. And not all epistolary novels work very well in that format. Even if the story itself is enjoyable, they're not always perfect. But I do, generally speaking, love reading an epistolary novel. If I see or hear that a certain book is written in epistolary style, whether as a journal or letters or some other form of communication, I'm interested. Number 2, follow-up question. What is it about the epistolary novels that you love or hate? So I love the creativity and the way that it forces the author of the story to approach the story from a different angle. And I love that anything that inspires creativity is right up my alley. So, and anything that is a little bit of a break from the norm, I enjoy that. So I love the uniqueness of the epistolary format and the way that it forces the author to share the story from a different perspective and with a different lens. And there's nothing that I hate about epistolary novels, but I do think there are some drawbacks namely in perspective and in the level of realism, if you will, because people don't share, generally speaking, dialogue in letters, or, they don't share word for word conversations that they have, and they don't share minute details usually in letters. Back in the day, it was much more common for that to be the case because that was the primary form of communication. Now we can call someone on the phone, we can send a quick text. If we call on the phone, we probably would share more detailed information. But if we're just texting someone, that's not gonna happen. Emails, not gonna happen. If we write a letter to someone, it's not to share very lengthy details. So that kind of becomes unrealistic in that sense. Also, the perspective can be limited, which I don't mind personally. I don't mind first person narrative. I only mind it when it's present tense. Otherwise, first person narrative, I don't have a problem with it. I don't mind the limited perspective. Again, it forces the author to be really creative, and some authors are better with it than others. Some are really masterful at giving you a full view of the story from one person's perspective. Even when that person's perspective is limited, you as the reader have a full perspective. That is when I think first person narrative is done masterfully. And same with epistolary. Some are better at it than others and can realistically, through the medium of letters and journals or whatever, give you a complete picture of what is happening without crossing the line into things that wouldn't actually happen, that they wouldn't actually write or share or whatever. Number 3. What is your favorite adaptation of an epistolary novel, or what epistolary novel would you like to see an adaptation of? And I have an answer to the first question. I don't really have an answer to the second one, but to the first one, I would say Dear Daddy Longlegs. There is a musical adaptation of that, and I really enjoy it. You can find the whole performance on YouTube. It is between 2 people. I want to say that the singers are Megan McGinnis and Paul Alexander Nolan, but I might have those names wrong, but it's just the 2 of them and they just sing back and forth to each other. I love the set design. I love the way that they designed it, how they stayed true to the epistolary format of the story. and managed to make it work in a very intimate setting, and it's just a lot of fun. I love the songs. They don't really stand alone outside of the context of the musical, so you probably wouldn't have heard them anywhere unless you're a big musical fan, but it's definitely worth watching, especially if you have enjoyed the book and if you like musicals. I haven't really thought much about what epistolary novel I would like to see made into an adaptation besides that one. I know others have been made. You know, like for example, Dracula has a lot of adaptations, but I have not actually seen any of them. And other ones don't come to mind immediately, but Daddy Long Legs is my answer to the first part of that question, the musical. Number 4, what literary character do you wish you could correspond with? And I love these questions because they made me think a lot and like comb through my mental catalog of characters and books, etc. And I settled on Beth from Little Women. And I don't know if it was just because of the mood I was in. I was just in a cozy, relaxing, reading kind of mood. And Beth just seemed like the perfect person that I would want to correspond with. Because I think because Beth was so focused on her home life. She wasn't focused on big things like Joe. Like Joe would be intimidating a little bit to me. But Beth's focus was on her home life, on her family, on the daily details, on her pets, on her music, on the charity endeavors that she shared with her mother, and just being able to correspond on those home life details. I would love that because that's mostly where my life is, not on, you know, big, grandiose things or ambitious endeavors, but just the joys of home life and the coziness and the warmth of that. So I would love to correspond with Beth from A Little Women. Number 5, who is a character from history that you wish you could peek into their real, unedited, and uncensored journal? Because we know many famous people edited their journals themselves or got rid of them, or their family edited, censored, etc. after their death, which is perfectly valid. I mean, that should happen for sure. I'm not complaining about that. But who would you like to read their unedited, uncensored journals? And well, first of all, I have to say I would really love to read Jane Austen's uncensored letters. Her sister Cassandra censored and burned many of Jane Austen's letters. So what remains is what she wanted the world to see about Jane Austen. Again, totally fair. I would do the same thing for my sisters, but I would still love to see Jane Austen's real letters. But my answer to this question is actually, well, I have 2 more people, I guess. I guess I have multiple answers to this question. The next one would be Abraham Lincoln. I would really love, I don't even know if he wrote down anywhere what he was really thinking throughout the course of his life, not just about his political career and all of the things that he went through during the Civil War and that aspect of things, but also his, even more so, his, because again, honing the focus in on home life and family life, his relationship with Mary Todd and his thoughts about her and their children and life in the White House and their life as they went through all of the struggles of the Civil War and everything. I would be really interested in knowing those inner thoughts that he had about all of that. And then the other one would be Alexandra. Now I have read, this is Alexandra, the Tsarina of Russia, the last one, the Romanovs. I have read, I think probably some diary entries because I've read the letters between Nicholas and Alexandra and then like assorted family members and everything. And in there, I believe, are journals. Nicholas kept a detailed daily journal, but it was usually just pretty much just basic stuff in it, I think. But some of those entries were included. I can't remember if Alexandra had diary entries or journal entries in there also. But again, I'm sure that those have been edited and censored. So I would really like to know what she was really thinking about some things, in particular her relationship with Rasputin. I mean, I think it's pretty well documented anyway, but what was she really thinking? And then just their family relationships. Again, I'm sensing a theme here, like focusing in on the family and the interrelationships, the home life. Just really curious about that. Number 6, what is your favorite literary letter? And there really is no contest for me, but I do have two answers. One is Mr. Darcy's letter to Lizzie after his disastrous proposal, when he is trying to clear his name to her and sharing the information with her to help her understand from his perspective. And that's just, it's a key letter in the course of the story, and you're reading it along with Lizzie, and you go through all of the emotions that she goes through, because some of it is not new information to you as a reader, but some of it is, and you're discovering it along with Lizzie. And you know, you go with Lizzie through this gradual change of understanding about who Mr. Darcy is. And then the other letter would be the one I read in my Epistolary January announcement video, which was Captain Wentworth's letter to Anne Elliot, which is just one of the most romantic letters in the history of book letter writing, and I just really love that one. Number 7, which novel that is not an epistolary novel do you think would work well as one? And I think that Jane Eyre would, because it's almost written in a journal style. She's writing down her recollections and addressing you as reader. So it's already almost in a journal sort of style, but I think it would be interesting as letters too. Like, what if she was writing letters, I don't know to whom, but part of the problem is she was such a solitary person, but there could be different people throughout the course of her life that she was writing to. Like maybe she had to write to her aunt at some point, you know, reporting on school, or, you know, maybe, when she was younger, or maybe then she wrote to some of her friends from school, and when they began to go their different ways. And anyway, just her letters, but also like Mr. Rochester, it would be interesting to read letters written from him, and even the other characters that she encounters throughout the story, St. John and his family, and Blanche Ingram, and all of those guests there. It would be interesting to read some letters that, like, communication that they had between each other, but also to their extended families, especially Blanche Ingram, and letters from Jane's family when she was young, to other people about Jane. Like, I really feel like it could be an interesting story. Maybe someone should endeavor to write Jane Eyre as an epistolary novel. Number 8, which epistolary novel do you wish you could relive again for the first time? And I had a really hard time. Just now, as I've been talking, I really think that Pride and Prejudice is not strictly epistolary, but there are some amazing letters in it. Not just the one I mentioned, but there are some other great letters in there. And originally, Jane Austen had written it as an epistolary novel. So I guess one answer would be, I wish I could read it as she wrote it as an epistolary novel. And I also wish that I could reread it again for the first time, and not knowing what's happening, read that letter along with Lizzie. But as a real epistolary novel, to answer this question, I would say Dracula. I just read it for the first time in October, so I'm still pretty close to it. And it was just, I think anytime I read it after, it wouldn't be the same, because the suspense element is gone a little bit, and because you know what's going to happen and you know how everything is going to be resolved. So it wouldn't be the same experience, the same kind of like heart-stopping experience the first time when you read it through. So that would be one that I would like to relive. If you were a character in an epistolary novel, what would your stationery look like? Well, it certainly would not, as much as I would want it to be, it would probably not be elegant and refined. I would probably be writing at the last minute, hastily scratching with my quill on a piece of random paper that I found somewhere, getting my note out to whoever it needs to go to at the last minute. Pretty sure I would not be prepared ahead of time with any sort of custom paper designed for myself with a letterhead or any sort of thing like that. It's probably not happening. Number 10, what is the first epistolary novel you can recall reading? And again, my answer for that one is Daddy Long Legs. I read that when I was a young teenager, and it was my first experience that I remember with the format, and I really enjoyed it. And it's still, I look back on it very fondly. I've read it a couple of times, and it is due for a reread. I would like to reread that again. Which literary character, epistolary or otherwise, would you write to for advice? And this was a fun one to think about as well. And I settled on Rachel Lind. Now, would I ever actually write Rachel Lind for advice? No, because I tend not to ask advice from people who willingly give it all the time. I tend to ignore their advice, generally speaking. And yet, at the same time, I mean, the woman wasn't wrong most of the time, right? Like, she usually knew what she was talking about. She had a lot of practical common sense. Now, she didn't have much of Anne's imagination or sense of wonder, so we all know that's very important. But at the same time, practical common sense cannot be underrated either. So if I needed practical common sense and someone to just really be honest with me, as much as I would have to humble myself, I do think that Rachel Lind would be the best person to ask. And finally, tag 2 people. And I am going to tag Tammy at Protagonist Pub and Jen at Jen's Reading Life. They are both participating in the Epistolary January, so I hope that they have a moment to do this tag. It doesn't have to be done in January. That's why we called it the Epistolary Query Tag, so you can do it anytime that you want. And I hope that you enjoy. And anybody who wants to do this tag, please feel free. Just tag the co-hosts back in your response, and we look forward to hearing from you. And tell me in the comments what your answers would be to some of these questions or what you think about my responses. And I will see you next time. Bye.